A man walked along Highway 74 collecting aluminum cans just like every other day. But this time he stopped. Something was wrong. There was a pile of trash, half covered in brush, and it didn't look right. He stepped closer and then he saw it. A human torso. No head, no limbs, just the brutal remains of someone who hadn't been there the night before. That discovery unraveled a mystery nearly a decade in the making. A killer who walked among neighbors, worked on highways, and left behind a trail of women murdered, mutilated, and discarded like refuse. That torso belonged to 37-year-old Sharon Tucker Stone. She was the third known victim of Scott Wilson Willams, and the final clue that led investigators to a man who had evaded justice for nearly a decade. But Willams wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in alleyways. He was a highway worker, a neighbor, a man with no criminal record. And yet, behind closed doors, he committed acts so brutal, they left seasoned detectives shaken. Welcome to Undersoil, the podcast that unearths the stories buried in silence, suspicion, and southern soil. In this episode, we're digging into the life and crimes of Scott Wilson Willams. We'll trace the timeline of his murders, examine the evidence that finally brought him down, and explore how someone so seemingly ordinary could carry out acts so monstrous. And we'll confront the rumors, the ones that never made it into court, but still haunt the margins of this case. Long before investigators knew his name, they knew his victims. And they weren't just names in a headline. They were women with histories, families, and futures cut short by a man who lived just down the road. The first victim is Sharon House Presley. Murdered in 1997, she was from Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had faced hardship in her life. Willams shot and mutilated her, leaving her body in a remote area, and her case went cold for years. The second victim is Christina Oots Parker. She was killed in 2004, and like Presley, she was vulnerable and alone when Willams found her. He used the same method: shooting, dismemberment, and disposal in isolation. The third victim is Sharon Tucker Stone. Murdered in 2006, her torso was discovered by a man collecting cans along Highway 74. It was her death that finally led investigators to Willams. Each woman was treated as disposable. Their bodies were mutilated, their lives erased, and yet they were the ones who ultimately exposed him. What's missing from every report is how Willams met these women. There's no record, no known connection, and maybe that silence is part of the story. There were also two survivors, women who endured kidnapping, rape, and torture. Their testimony helped seal Willams' fate. They lived and they spoke. One of the surviving victims told the court, "He tied me up, raped me, and told me he was going to kill me." Another woman testified, "He kept me in his trailer for days, he beat me, and he said no one would ever find me." These statements were part of the evidence that led to Willams' conviction on charges of first-degree rape, kidnapping, and attempted murder. This case isn't just research, it's personal. Willams lived just miles from my childhood home. My grandmother owned an auction, and he went there often. He wasn't a stranger. He was a familiar face in my childhood. My mother knew him too, and like the women he targeted, she struggled with addiction at the time. She could have easily been one of them. That realization hit me hard because when you grow up in a small town, you think you know who's dangerous and you think you can spot the threat. But Willams didn't look like a monster, he looked like a neighbor. Maybe that's why this story stuck with me, why I kept digging, and why I couldn't let go of this one disturbing quote I read years ago. It's unverified, but unforgettable. Willams told investigators he wanted to eat the breast of one of the women, but he didn't because it smelled too bad. It's not in the court records, it's not in the news, but it's out there circulating the margins of this case. And whether it's fact or fiction, it says something about how we remember monsters, not just by what they did, but what we fear they were capable of. That quote haunted me, not just because of what it said, but because of who it could have been said about. Women like my mother, women who were vulnerable, overlooked, and living on the edge of society's attention. The kind of women Willams targeted. And maybe that's why I kept chasing it, not to prove it to be true, but to understand why it existed at all. What does it say about the stories we tell and the ones we're afraid to? On Undersoil, we don't just report facts, we interrogate the narrative. We ask why some details are remembered and others are just erased. And we dig into the uncomfortable truth, that sometimes the scariest part of a story isn't what's confirmed, it's what's plausible. Scott Willams was arrested on March 9, 2006, after forensic evidence linked him to the murder of Sharon Tucker Stone. DNA recovered from the crime scene and discarded items led the investigators to his mobile home behind his mother's house. Inside, they found blood traces, restraints, and personal items that tied him to multiple victims. The case didn't go to trial. In July 2008, Willams entered what's called an Alford plea, a legal move where he didn't admit guilt, but he acknowledged that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict him. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole, plus additional charges for rape, kidnapping, and attempted murder involving 2 surviving victims. He never confessed, he never explained, but the evidence and the voices of the women he couldn't silence spoke instead. Scott Willams died in prison on August 6, 2022. He died silent. Whatever truths he held, he took with him to the grave. But the women he targeted, those he murdered, and those who survived, still deserve more than a conviction. They deserve to be remembered. This case didn't make national headlines. It didn't spark documentaries or trending hashtags, but it happened in my town, near my family, and around people I know. And that's why I told it. Not to sensationalize it, but to understand it, to give it shape, and to give it space. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like neighbors, and sometimes they blend in so well we don't even see them until it's too late. And even now, there are pieces missing. Details that were never confirmed, quotes that were never sourced, but they linger, in the forms, in memory, and in the margins. On Undersoil, we dig into those margins. We ask what gets buried and why. And we remember the people who were never supposed to be forgotten. Next time on Undersoil, we dig into a story from Charlotte, North Carolina, one that didn't make the front page until it was too late. I'm your host, Katie Satterfield, and thanks for listening. If you love this episode, you can show your support by tapping the link in the bio.